Hello everyone, my name is Irma Kulovets, and the topic that I chose to do my presentation on is sodium in our food and how too much sodium intake is a risk to our health, and it is in disguise because not a lot of people know about all the risks. So I'm going to start off with the introduction of what sodium really is. So sodium, the definition is it's a chemical element of atomic number 11, and it is a soft silver-white reactive metal of the alkali metal group. Sodium is then used to make salt, which is a crystalline compound that consists of sodium chloride, and it is very abundant in nature, and it is used to season or preserve food or in industry. So the question that I might ask is, how do we come to use sodium in our food? So a little brief history includes that it is believed that the relatively high salt usage of virtually all societies today became common beginning between 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. So we've known about salt a very long time, and around 5 to 10,000 years ago, we did discover that it could be used in our food. And Kauai, he's a researcher. He talked about how it is a specific human trait, and he said that it was a learned behavior of the Japanese macaques that involved dipping potatoes in salt water rather than fresh water. So he talked about a lot in his article how the Japanese were the first ones who figured out that dipping their potatoes in salt water gives it a better taste and they last longer, and rather than just using regular fresh water. And then also most commentators believe that the reason for early salt use was food preservation, and that this early use was the origin of the current high consumption. So basically we knew about it a long time ago, and it was common then, and it's very common today as well. Also, it has been argued that many distinguishing characteristics of human society and culture owe their origins to the desire for salt and the salt trade. So a lot of historical events have a lot to do with salt and salt trading and different countries trading between each other to get this sodium to use in their foods. So it is very common in a lot of our historical events. So next we're going to talk about some of the benefits of sodium intake. So sodium helps muscles and nerves work properly by assisting muscular contraction and transmission of nerve signals. It also helps regulate blood pressure and volume. And I found an article on Mayo Clinic, and it reports that having the proper amount of sodium in the body maintains an appropriate overall balance of bodily fluids. Sodium also helps sustain a regular blood pH level, which is an important indicator of health. So basically having a good, decent amount of sodium in your body does help your body regulate and maintain that homeostasis, that irregular bodily fluids and temperatures. And I just included a little nutritional fact sheet on the side. Basically, every food that you eat, or you can look it up online if it doesn't, like fruit, doesn't obviously have the nutritional fact on the fruit, but you can always Google it and it'll tell you how much sodium is included in each food. So we may ask, what are the risks of sodium intake? So some of the risks include when the kidneys, which naturally balance sodium levels, cannot excrete sufficient sodium, it begins to aggregate in the blood. So if the kidneys can't regulate how much sodium comes in and how much sodium comes out, obviously that sodium is going to then go into your bloodstream, which can cause a lot of problems. So some of those problems include high blood pressure, as well as fluid buildup in people with congestive heart failure, cirrhosis, or kidney disease. These conditions make it especially hard for kidneys to balance sodium levels. So if you have any of these kidney disease, even kidney stones, it's hard for the kidneys to balance those sodium levels, which then can cause a lot of different issues. And also, extra sodium causes the body to retain water, increasing blood volume and causing the heart to work harder to move blood, placing more pressure on the arteries, and that increased blood pressure can ultimately lead to heart disease, heart failure, or stroke. So as you can tell, there's a lot of problems that can come with your kidneys not being able to regulate how much sodium goes in and out, which can then lead to a lot of chronic illnesses like heart disease, heart failure, or stroke that can lead to death. So there is a lot of risks that go into sodium, especially if you don't balance how much you take in. So we may ask, who is really at risk for this intake of sodium, too much intake? I found that people over age 50 have a higher chance, people who have a high or slightly elevated blood pressure, because that sodium does increase blood pressure as well. So if you already have a high blood pressure, that could lead to heart strokes or clots or any of that. People who have diabetes and African Americans. So those is what I found that a lot of people um, have a higher risk of developing health problems related to salt consumption. So another thing that I found when I was researching sodium is the role of potassium in sodium intake. So I thought that was very interesting. I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So the importance of potassium. Sodium and potassium have exactly opposite effects on heart health. So high salt intake increases blood pressure, which can lead to heart disease, while high potassium intake can help relax blood vessels and excrete the sodium and decrease blood pressure. So basically sodium, it increases your blood pressure, and potassium decreases your blood pressure. Very simple. And our bodies need far more potassium than sodium each day. But the typical United States diet is just the opposite. Americans average about 3,300 milligrams of sodium per day, about 75% of which comes from processed foods, while only getting 2,900 milligrams of potassium each day. So obviously different foods have sodium and different foods have potassium, but in this study, they did show that a lot of people are getting more sodium than they are getting potassium, but those two work hand in hand to balance each other out so you don't have very bigger issues such as heart disease or kidney failure or any of that. So I thought that was very interesting that we are not getting enough potassium in our diets, but we should be getting about the same amount so we can reduce that chance of having any different illnesses. So another study that I found that deals with potassium and sodium, it was in the Archives of Internal Medicine, and it provided more evidence that high salt diets have negative effects on health. And a little summary of it is that people who eat high sodium, low potassium diets have a higher risk of dying of a heart attack or from any cause, so basically diabetes or any of those causes. Also, they found that people can make a key dietary change to help lower their risk. So eating more fresh vegetables and fruits, which are naturally high in potassium and low in sodium, and they can reduce eating bread, cheese, and processed meat, as these and other processed foods are high in sodium and low in potassium. In this study, I also found that people with the highest sodium intakes had a 20% higher risk of death from any cause, which includes blood pressure, diabetes, stroke, than people with the lowest sodium intakes. Also, another fact is that people with highest potassium intakes had a 20% lower risk of dying than people with lowest intakes. And an interesting thing that I found is also that relationship between sodium to potassium in the diet People with highest ratio of sodium to potassium in their diets had double the risk of dying of a heart attack than people with the lowest ratio. And they had a 50% higher risk of death from any disease. So basically, it just confirmed the fact that you do need that balance of sodium and potassium to maintain a healthy diet, but a lot of people are not getting that, which is causing those sodium overdosages. So in conclusion, too much sodium is not good for you. It could lead to cardiovascular disease, cancer, osteoporosis, which is a bone disease. It thins out your bones. But it is still important in our diet because it does have many benefits. Like everything else, we do have to control what goes into our bodies and how much of it does. So overall, I learned a lot about sodium and how it came to be in existence in our food and in our diets. I learned about the benefits. So sodium is healthy for you if you know how to control how much you're taking in, but the problem is a lot of people do not have that balance of how much sodium they're getting into their bodies, which could lead to a lot of deathly outcomes. And those are my works cited. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening, and I hope to hear more about your presentations. Bye.